Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. In this episode, I have calls from Goblin's Henchman from the Goblin's Henchman podcast, Joe from the Hindsightless podcast, and Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Those are all linked in the show notes. Also going to go through another section of the book Muster that I started covering as part of OctoSR. It's going to roll on into November. And then finally, we're going to have more Tales of the Dragon Slayers. So we're going to get to it.
Hi Phantom, Goblin Henchman here. So just been listening to your episode on surprise. It's actually probably the topic that got me into doing podcasts, sort of. If you're interested, you can have a listen to episode 1 of my podcast and episode 18, where I sort of consider surprise. I mean, I really like surprise as an idea, the mechanic. It's a really, really sort of elegant little bit of trickery dice mechanics. I think the really important thing about surprise to get your mindset around, and I think this is where I used to trip up badly on it, and maybe I'm still wrong, but the thing about surprise is it's not really a save. Don't think of surprise as a save mechanic. Think of it as like an attack. So if a bugbear surprises on a 3, think of it as an attack. So he's trying to surprise you, and if he rolls 1, 2, or 3 on a d6, he surprises you. It's not a sort of save against his attack, and vice versa. A normal party, D&D party, will surprise on 1 and 2. So obviously surprise has to be in the mix, so there has to be a chance for surprise. But if there's a chance of surprise, let's say the bugbears and the party bump into each other, the bugbear rolls to see if they surprise you, 1 and 3, and the party rolls to see if they surprise the bugbear, 1 and 2. And as you say, if say the bugbear rolls a 3 and the party roll a 2, then the first 2 rounds both the humans and the bugbear are staring at each other slack jaw, and then in that third, I think I always say turn, but of course I do mean segment, then the bugbear can act. But what I think is really neat about the mechanic is that it's like a bit like a game of chicken. It's, like you've got to drive all the way up to the edge. Imagine driving to the edge of the cliff. The idea is you want to get as close to the edge of the cliff without going off, and that's the surprise mechanic. So for a bugbear, he surprises 1 in 3, brackets on a d6. So what he wants to roll as high as possible without going over the line. So if he rolls a 3, that's the best result. He will surprise the bugbear will surprise for 3 segments. If he rolls a 2, it will only be 2 segments. If he rolls a 1, it will be only 1 segment. So, yeah. And as I say, I considered this in my first episode of my podcast, and I didn't do a very good job. I muddled my words up. I said turns and all sorts. But what I did from that is I thought that you could actually make you could do an RPG system based on the surprise mechanic, which is what's in my episode 18, where I make a D6 light RPG system. Anyway, that might interest you, but as I said, I think the key thing for understanding surprise for me, and I know I'm not like everyone, is to understand that think of it as an attack, not as a save, and then I think that starts making much more sense then. All right, cheers, fella. Bye.
Well, thank you for that call, Goblin's Henchman. That is really helpful, I think. I think it's something I've struggled with in my mind is it the party rolling to avoid surprise, or is it the creature rolling to surprise? But that makes it very straightforward. It's an attack, so it's the creature rolling to surprise, and it's the party rolling to surprise the creature. Pretty simple now that I've heard you say it out loud, and that'll be very helpful down the road. So thank you. And I did listen in to those podcasts, and some really interesting thoughts there. I thought, but then yours always are. Your blog and your products that you put out there and your podcasts always have something interesting that get the mind whirling and twirling. So I appreciate that, and thanks for the call.
Hey, Phantom. It's been a while, man, but I'm still out here. I was just listening to your latest episode, and Jason was talking about something that I had complained about and wanted me to call in, so I'm calling in. Yeah, so in the specific situation he's talking about, I was in a game of Pathfinder. I wasn't running it, I was a player. And one of the players told the player whose turn it was what to do based on the initiative order. Said, no, don't attack that guy, attack this guy instead. And that was my complaint. I don't love the idea of looking at the initiative tracker, though. On things like Roll20, there's no way to get away from it, so I don't really care anymore. And even when I ran games, I would have the players write out the initiative order, so it's not like it was a really big deal. But it was just that particular instance that just felt really just it felt over the line to me to be like, hey, no, don't do that thing you're going to do. It's better if you do this thing instead because this bad guy is going next. That was the specific instance. So, yeah, man, it's all on a goddamn spectrum. Everything's on a friggin' spectrum, right? There are very few finite, definite things in the world. So, yeah, that's it. Just adding some clarity, probably not, to what Jason was saying. But anyway, man, I'm going to get back to your episode. Good stuff. I'm still enjoying everything you're doing. Love that you're rocking OSR October. That kicks ass. And yeah, dude, talk to you later. Peace out.
Yeah, I can see how that might get under your skin. I think to me, it's for me in that circumstance, it wouldn't even necessarily be that he's looking ahead on the initiative tracker, although that would be annoying as well because I think the players, if they have a chance, especially if their characters have a chance before something happens, or just as a general purpose, like a lot of old school games do, to establish a procedure, the way they do things, the way they tackle things, or if they know going in, if they're going to be the initiators, okay, this is what we're going to try to do. We'll go after these guys first and then this group next, or we're going to try to get this guy down. That's one thing, but to just do it in the middle of combat, and especially the way you said it, and it may not be the way it went down, sounded like he was telling the other player what to do. And I think I've had an episode before where that that had come up in another podcast, and I talked about how that's kind of and that was a bugaboo for the person that did it. That was metagaming. Hey, well, we know that this monster is about to go down. Don't use your spell. Use a weapon. I believe that was what the circumstance was. But and then just in general, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Do this. It's like let the player take his turn his way and decide what his character is going to do. And it may not be based on the initiative tracker, or it may not be based on even what's great strategy. It may just be based on what his character would do. And that, I mean, that can go bad too. Well, it's what my character would do, but that's another whole thing. But yeah, like you said, it's on a spectrum. Some games expect you to do it that way, I think, and other games expect you to do it the opposite, where you're trying to be more immersive. And some of it just has to do with not even has to do with the game or the rule set. It's just the people you're playing with. But I can see how under circumstances that would definitely be irritating. And thanks for calling, Joe. I know it's been a while. I've been listening to your podcast. I know I haven't called into yours. And anybody out there, you need to listen to Joe's podcast, Hindsightless, because it's a cool podcast. And he tells you about all the cool adventures that he's either playing in or running. And it's fantastic. So check the show notes, find the link, check it out.
Hey, Jason here. I'm listening to episode 65, and you're talking about the print-on-demand versions of Muster on Drive Thru RPG, and you mentioned their new layout. And can I just go on record here to say how much I hate the new layout of Drive Thru RPG? That's all. Just had to get that out.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the new new look at drive-through either. Uh, it seems like they're trying to make everything more visual, but in the process, they're trying to make everything bigger, so it takes up more desktop space, more browser space, and just the arbitrarily flipping some things around. If you went to a particular product, the information about the publisher used to be on the right hand side, and now it's on the left hand side, and I'm not sure what the difference is. And they used to have the different ways of sorting results and doing search on the left hand side, and now it's just in a little band kind of at the top when you go to a new page. And so, I mean, some of that is lack of familiarity, of course. Maybe it's easier to use this way. I don't see what about it would be easier to use. And it's also kind of jarring that their other sites, Drive Through Cards and War Game Vault, are still the old format, or at least that's the ones I get. Maybe others are getting I know I get the little message when I go on Drive Through RPG that, hey, you're getting a first look at the new look. So they'll probably all end up the same, but yeah, I mean, some of that may be the old guy on the couch talking. Back in my day, Drive Through RPG used to look different, and it was better, and we liked it that way. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. It's not quite right. It just doesn't feel right.
Hey, Jason here. I'm outdoors in the backyard with my dogs. I've got a bonfire going. I'm burning muster as we speak after hearing you talk about the Cruft section and his sacrilegious words in regards to the holy scriptures of early D&D texts. No, I'm kidding. I think he's not totally correct. And I would argue against the idea. Is the layout amateurish? Sure. Is the art amateurish? Sure. Are the ideas behind it amateurish? I would say no. And I'm not even drunk, even though I can't pronounce that word. But I think, and you've been playing AD&D, first edition, and even though you have to flip and turn through those books to find the rules and all, the way they interlace and work is far from amateurish. A lot of thought and effort was put into those rules and the way they set those up. So I think I would rail against his comments on the professionalism of the early works. I don't have any issues with his main idea, though. The idea that you can play this with just about any rule set, that you can take what's worthwhile out of there and apply it to your game. If you prefer to run with a unified system, say, a game with a unified mechanic, like 3rd edition or something like that, there's no reason not to do that. And you can still run a wargaming style game using a unified mechanic as your base system, right? So I don't think I totally disagree with him, but I do think I disagree with how harshly he defined the early works and the early books. So maybe that's a distinction that matters. Maybe it's not, but I did feel compelled to say it. And no, I didn't burn my copy of Muster like the villagers in Sleepy Hollow burnt Ichabod Crane's copy of Cotton Mather's The History of Witchcraft in New England, but I might have been tempted for a minute there. Keep up the great work.
I agree. I think sometimes the older texts get some harsh treatment because they were the first ones. I mean, we didn't even know. I mean, the concept of RPG hadn't barely been invented by the time, particularly AD&D came around, and in earlier works, it wasn't even referred to as RPG. It was referred to as something else, fantasy adventure gaming. And when you're the first to do something, it's rarely the most refined way to do something, or to put it better, the most refined way to communicate something. And I think that's really the difficulty in some of the older texts is communicating what this is and translating what they did and what they built over years, and probably by the time AD&D came out, over a decade at that point, and communicate that to people who maybe didn't even have any idea what you were talking about. Maybe they're familiar with war games, maybe they were familiar with board games, maybe they weren't familiar with any of it. Maybe they were just picking up because they heard somebody say, "Have you heard about this thing D&D?" Because you hear a lot of, and I know you've probably experienced this a lot with the people you've interviewed, where you talk about, ask them how they were introduced to the game. They talk about, well, I heard about this thing called D&D and I wanted to try it. So you go into something absolutely blank and something is hard to parse, then you don't always have a good opinion of it. And that makes it all the more interesting that that there's advocates of particular D&D rule set, like particularly BX and Holmes are the ones I've heard the most, that are just enraptured with the way they are put together and the way, in some ways, that they teach the game and how well they do that. And to have something that early in an industry to be refined enough to do that, I think that's amazing. But, yeah, finding stuff in that book, in the DMG, AD&D DMG, is difficult sometimes. And I know a YouTube channel I watch, The Joy of Wargaming, he's doing an AD&D solo campaign, and he's got flags and stuff marked, and he still ends up flipping through trying to find something and asking people in the chat, because he'll do live streams usually when he's doing it, and ask people that, hey, do you know what page this is on? Because I thought it was here and I can't find it. But that makes it poorly organized, but it doesn't make it bad conceptually or a bad book or bad techniques and bad rules. And I'm not sure that the author of Muster was saying that that was bad, just that it wasn't well presented and well put together. But some of that can be attributed, as I said, to it being a relatively new thing, and some of that could just be the way Gary's brain worked. I know people probably listening to my podcast sometimes, when I just start going off the cuff, are like, where is he going with this? But I think you make some very good points there, and I appreciate it.
Hey, Jason here. Just listened to episode 66, Muster Part 7, I think. It's interesting because you can hear the author recognize the genius in the old rules, but you can hear the disdain for the old rules in the writing. That's how I'm listening to you read it. So that's would probably turn me off from continuing to read the book, to be honest. But there are some interesting things in there. As far as being able to increase attributes, maybe. I think if you're going to do that, I would really limit how much you could increase your attributes, right? So you'd have to figure out how you're going to do that, come up with a system that, but especially on like the 3d6 scale, I don't know. I would limit it though. I wouldn't let you go from a 5 to a 17 over time, right? Maybe you could, but you'd have to make it pretty punitive after because you're going to have that initial modest gain, and then after you plateau for what your natural ability is going to be, it would be really hard to get over that. And everybody's natural ability level is going to be a little bit different. So, I don't know, maybe when you roll your attributes, roll another D4, and that's how high you can go for your natural ability, something like that. Or I guess you could even do a D6. But, and so you can easily increase to that point, that additional number that you rolled, and then after that, it'd be nigh impossible to increase over that. That would also allow, if you're playing AD&D, so if you had a 16 strength and you rolled a 4, you could go to 17, 18, and then the first two categories of exceptional strength in case of fighter. So there might be something to the idea, but I would come up with natural limits and try to impose that, I think.
I agree that the growth of attributes shouldn't be infinite. It should be something that eventually reaches some kind of a natural cap, and then to exceed that, you need some kind of magic. I've always thought it was a shame that in a lot of the D&D lines, the older D&D lines, there weren't as many magic items to let you improve your attributes, and usually those were a lot of the books, magic books that you would have come across for that in the old school games. They were one-time use only, so you can increase your strength one time, or you're increasing your intelligence one time, and a lot of times they were kind of locked to a particular class of character as well. And then, of course, if you look at the wish spell in AD&D, it's like a wish can only make it go up 0.1%, a 10% each time you use a wish. So you would need 10 wishes to advance 1 point. So, at least with strength, there were some good magic items. The gauntlets of ogre power and the girdles of various giant strengths get you well up into the 20s, maybe even to 30. I haven't looked in a while to see what the highest one was. I like the way that John on Tale of the Manticore does it with the characters that he does in his solo play, where he when they do level up after so many episodes, a character is considered to have leveled up, and he'll roll a d6 for each attribute, and if you get a 6, you get a point. So there's should technically be able to get percentage wise one attribute to improve every time, but sometimes they'll get a couple and sometimes he'll get none. So, and that's something that as you level up will get you up a little bit at a time, but it's random and it's not a sure thing, and it's not going to go fast because you would have to hit several level ups in a row to really ramp up an attribute quickly. And then if you're running it with an old school style game where you're not podcasting it and doing it by episode, you're doing it by XP, because of that sort of exponential buildup of XP where each level requires more than it took to get you to the level previously. That would take a while. But yeah, I like those thoughts. I like some of your thoughts on that. That's very good. Thank you.
Hey, Jason here. Just listened to episode 67, and it's interesting timing. Talking about hit points and healing, I've got an episode that's dropping the end of the first week of November, like November 3rd, where Daniel Norton and myself kind of bat about ideas about hit points and healing. So, interesting timing how it all falls out. I, for one, am not opposed to you continuing into November to finish this book out. So I appreciate you taking the time and the effort to do this. It is a big commitment on your part, and I want you to know that is appreciated. Talk to you soon.
Well, thank you for the kind words. And for those of you out there who are listening to my podcast, if for some reason you're not listening to the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, this episode is dropping on November 2nd. So if you're listening to this podcast right after it comes out, tomorrow is when Jason's podcast comes out that he has with Daniel Norton. And whenever those two talk, it's always good stuff. It's always good stuff when either one of them talks on their own podcast. And when they get together, it's doubly so. So make sure you check that out. And there will be a link to his podcast page in the show notes. Our read-through of Muster has now extended past OctoSR and is rolling into November. Mustervember? No. Anyway, the next section of the book, which is page 101, is campaign structure. When you begin a new D&D campaign, it is either in basic or extended format. These are just the words I like to use for the strategic scope of the project. Both types are established, both types are fun games, but I recommend the basic structure to new referees as it is a simpler, quicker game. In the basic campaign, the strategic context of play is fixed by convention. The game is specifically about this adventuring party delving into this dungeon in the hopes of finding great treasures, or more specifically, some MacGuffin or other defined at scenario start. The game begins at the dungeon door. The subject matter of play is dungeon warfare, the doctrine and conduct of dungeon exploration. This is the game taught by the highly influential basic D&D line of game texts. It's manageable for newcomers because both the referee and the adventurers have a fairly stable and clear job To get to play, the referee only needs to prepare and conduct a single dungeon, while the players put together a party by generating characters for all players and putting those together in a party. I discussed the general outline of how basic D&D plays at the beginning of the book. In summary, generate characters and set up the party, equipment, hirelings, scenario rumors, etc. GM introduces the scenario. Gameplay typically begins at the dungeon entrance. Play the expedition, players maneuver, ref resolves, return from the dungeon, and score the success. This expedition cycle is a complete wargame in itself. The dungeons prepared by the referee test adventurers in various ways, asking them for risk management, knowledge of folklore and myth, small unit military tactics in dark places, and more. The player goal is above all survive, and secondarily to bring out success from the dreadful depths in the form of treasures to make a venture capitalist blush. Over several sessions, a basic campaign will repeat the pattern. The referee may bring the same dungeon for a new session of play, or if that dungeon has been exhausted, then a new one. The players may make changes to their party composition as their understanding of dungeoneering advances. Fictional particulars about the adventurers, their base town, and the surrounding world will no doubt develop, but the game itself is self-constrained, each expedition a dungeon, a new variation of tactical exploration to tackle. The game has been played a lot, and generally speaking, it's a hoot. The referee must be unbiased, and that's easier if you run the adventurers through dungeons that are not of your own creation. It makes the scenario more arbitrary and therefore easier to keep fair than if the referee designs their own dungeons. So moving outside the text for just a moment, that last part is interesting because a lot of discussion I've heard in OSR circles and old school play advocates is of building your own campaign, building your own world, building your own dungeons, things like that. But it's interesting that he says that it's better to run a dungeon, especially for beginning referees, to run a dungeon that is not of their own making because it's easier to be unbiased. And we've seen throughout the book that he pays a lot of heed and attention to having the referee be unbiased, and not just to be unbiased, but to really appear unbiased, so that there's not even a hint of impropriety, so to speak. Moving back to the text, extended D&D, sometimes called expert, advanced, or sandbox, is what basic D&D adapted into and tends to adapt today when played for a while. It is fairly natural for both the referee and the players to start asking questions about what lies outside the dungeon, after all. Experienced groups and referees often brew a new campaign in the extended format from the start. Characteristics of extended D&D is that it has a strategic layer lacking in the basic D&D. The adventurers still enter dungeons on treasure hunts, yes, but they also have lives between adventures. They plan expeditions, travel to faraway places, visit royal courts, sail on ships, and generally live the exciting lives of high-rolling adventurers. Many conceits involved in the basic game grow less binary and more complicated. Adventurers might spend several sessions in a single adventure location. Players might have many characters they manage in a character stable. Characters may have complicated motivations and interests beyond growing rich by seeking forgotten treasures. The group maintains a calendar of the fictional events, tracing the maneuvers of their adventurers in both time and space. Perhaps the single most important aspect of extended D&D, whence it gains the appellation of sandbox, it is no longer the referee who chooses the next adventure. The referee prepares a variety of ideas, and the play group suggests more. Adventures often arising from the personal interests of the players and characters. Such adventures are usually placed on a map so the adventurers can choose where to travel to encounter a variety of risks and opportunities. The very direction of the campaign is in the hands of the players, who can choose both what is wise for their characters and what is interesting for the players. The victory condition of extended D&D remains unchanged in the sense that you are still attempting to avoid death and gain points. The long-term prospects in both senses can develop far more complex, of course, and the terrain over which scenarios stretch has the potential to be wildly varied. because of how complicated the subject matter of D&D has become. So stepping outside the text again, I think most adherents, at least those I've heard of OSR style play, old school style play, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about what he refers to as the extended D&D or the advanced D&D, the sandbox style play where the players are bigger drivers of the campaign, and it's not a matter of the game master presenting a scenario for them to play for the evening or for several sessions. And that's kind of a defining feature in the development of RPGs, because you look into folks that have written books and done videos about the history of this game genre, and they go back to what's called the Braunstein. Actually, I think it's Braunstein. I probably mispronounced it there, because this is a scenario set in a Napoleonic war game, essentially, by a man named David Wesley. And he was in a play group with Dave Arneson, who was one of the authors of the original D&D. And this was a situation where instead of playing out a war game scenario on the table with armies, he assigned players to various roles that was to serve in a scenario that was to serve as sort of the pre-battle setup that would set up the conditions of the battle. And the idea that the players were supposed to communicate with the referee in a separate room with their moves, and he would lay out what their roles were, what their goals were, what kind of resources they had available to them, and that sort of thing. But the players began talking amongst themselves, negotiating amongst themselves, talking to the referee, and they enjoyed it so much that they wanted to keep doing it. And this served as kind of the kickoff for what eventually developed into the RPGs we have today, and greatly influenced Dave Arneson, and then his work when he began working together with Gary Gygax on D&D. So, but that follows the more what he referred to as basic scenario, where it's the referee that's establishing the scenario and kind of the stakes, and the players are taking it from there. Whereas the expanded is there's a variety of opportunities for any number of scenarios, and the players are the ones making the choices and driving the campaign forward. So I'm going to finish up with this last little bit. There's one little bit here. I like to phrase the wargaming topic of general D&D in a very specific way, reflecting the scope and variety of the game. How will you succeed and prosper in this cruel and beautiful world? So with that, I'm going to end this little short piece, because the next section is a pretty involved section, I think, and so it deserves its own segment. And with that, we're going to roll into more adventures in the world of the Tales of the Dragon Slayers. And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. This is just a quick prelude to the Tales of the Dragon Slayers section. You're going to hear several different segments that were recorded at kind of different times, and I kind of correct myself on a couple of things throughout them. So it's a little piecemeal. It may seem a little haphazard. The general thrust of it is determining whether a merchant caravan is going to try to push through where the gnolls are, and what's going on with the gnolls, and are they the only creatures around. So that's what this next little sort of shortish segment will be, and then that will conclude the podcast. So thank you for listening to this point, and hope you enjoy. As part of the wider world of the Tales of the Dragon Slayers, we have gnolls that are infesting the road down near to the town in the valley below the fort. And I got to thinking, would a merchant caravan still try to push through? Because if you look at the monster manual and you roll up merchants, 80% of that caravan is going to be mercenary guards. So they're usually pretty heavily guarded. And despite the fact that the area was kind of denuded of peoples when the dragon was running on its rampage. By this time, it's the regular course of life is starting to build back up, so there probably would be enough mercenaries available that could have been hired for a merchant caravan to come through the pass in the mountains and past the fort and down. So I think the main thing to consider whether the merchants push on would be the age. Well, not just the age, the personality of the leader. Age being part of that. So I'm going to roll up on the personality charts from the DMG what I think fill the requisite parts of the personality that would help determine whether a merchant caravan would try to push through before the knolls were cleared out by essentially the military. So we're going to start with age. How old is the leader of the caravan? And the leader is youthful. And then the sanity of the caravan leader is normal. Normal. The general tendencies of the personality would be opinionated and contrary. The overall personality is going to be extroverted, and within extroverted, blustering. A blustering personality. The disposition is going to be cheerful. The intellect, average. The materialism, because that would give it a reason to push through, would be greedy. Honesty is honorable, very honorable. Bravery is fearless. Morals is immoral. Interesting. Piety is reverent. Energy is normal. Thrift, spendthrift. And the interests, none. So no serious interests. All right, so if we look at this, I think someone useful, that makes it more likely that they would want to get on with it, push through, think that they can accomplish by pushing through the knolls. Sanity is normal, so that's neither really plus or minus. The personality, the general tendency, rather, being contrary, would make them more likely to push through when being told that the knolls were dangerous and they couldn't get through. Personality, bluster, would be a little boastful about what they could accomplish. Disposition, cheerful, that would be few things in a positive light. Intellect, average, neither a plus nor a minus. Greedy, materialism, greedy means that they want to get down and get to trading. Honesty, very honorable. That would probably make them less likely to push through, wanting to make sure that their companions survived. Bravery, fearless, obviously, would be toward pushing through. Morals, immoral, would have no problem slaughtering some knolls for profit, I don't think. Piety of reverent, I don't think that would really have an effect on this decision. Energy, normal, same. spendthrift probably is in some financial difficulty or always on the edge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the personality traits I think would tend to make them want to push through, where 1 would make them not. And we'll adjudicate this with essentially a reaction roll here. I'm going to use the morale check with this because you start off base 50 and then you go up or down. I'm going to say that the impetuousness of youthful that goes with being youthful, the greediness and the fearlessness probably all give a +5. The other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are probably worth +2 that would tend to go forward. So that's +25. I'm going to say that the very honorable quality that would tend toward conserving the fellow members of the caravan will be, say, a -5. So we'll go from, that'll give us a +20. So a 70% morale. So if roll 70% or under, the caravan tries to push through. Otherwise, they will stop and wait at the last outpost before the gnolls. And maybe they'll send some help when the expedition goes to dislodge the gnolls from where they are. All right, and the roll is a 48%. So before the fort can organize apart their own expedition to go after the gnolls, the caravan will try to push past them. The other thing to consider with the gnolls is, will they be operating alone when they try to ambush anyone that tries to come through the area? Now, they themselves have just moved in, but there have been various groups of creatures moving in. We have the hobgoblins, we have the orcs. The gnolls entry in the Monster Manual says they will generally be on friendly terms with orcs, hobgoblins, bugbears, ogres, and even trolls, providing the weaker types are not very much weaker in numbers, and the gnolls are relatively equal in strength to the stronger monsters. Now, the hobgoblins and ogre and orcs that we have already established in the area are too far away because they're 1 day and 2 days on horseback, respectively, away from the party's stronghold. Well, it's not their stronghold yet, it's their base of operations. And that, in turn, is 3 days marching distance from where the gnolls are. So they won't be helping, but there could be other groups that have moved into the area nearby that the gnolls are sort of teaming up with. I believe this caravan will have begun assembling after the first caravan, guarded by some of the fort troops, went down the valley to began to work their way with the knowledge that they're going to establish themselves in the keeps as they work their way up, so that by the time they returned, it would be safe to go out, not knowing, of course, that the gnolls had moved into one of the keeps. So they would be ready to leave by the time the guards got back to the fort, and they would leave despite the warnings. So that gives us a timeline for between the time the gnolls establish themselves and they get to where the gnolls are, because the guards encounter them, the gnolls have established themselves, the guards have worked their way up, and then the 5 keeps were established a day's march from each other, being on wagons, and in the Monster Manual it says that they're in wagons and they are horse-based. There's not anyone on foot in these merchant caravans. They'll move a little faster. It will only take them 4 days to get to that last keep instead of 5. So looking at when the gnolls establish themselves, there's going to be 10 days between the time that the gnolls establish themselves and the caravan gets to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to treat it as random encounter checks by rolling a d10, because civilization hasn't been kind of reestablished, so it will be considered wilderness area. And we'll roll 3 times a day because this is still the end of the foothills. And then if we have an encounter, we'll roll for the type. If it comes up as humanoids or ogres, or potentially even men if we get some bandits or brigands that might team up with the gnolls as well. We'll roll to see if we get those on the counter, then those will have the potential to be allies to the gnolls. So 10 days, that will be a total of 30 checks. So I'm going to roll 10d10 three times. So let's see. First roll here. We have 1, 2, 3 encounters indicated. So 3 encounters there. And then we've got another 1, 2 encounters indicated. So that's 5 total. Then the last roll is another 1, 2, 3. Wow, that's a lot of encounters. All right, so rolling 8 encounters. Get organized here. All right, percentile dice. 77%. That does not give us anything that would do with the gnolls. 21% would be, I guess I should say that's a Pegasus flying by. All right, 21, that was the previous roll. So the 21% would be a pack of wild dogs going through. 41% would be, that's humanoids. So we've got a winner with the humanoids. 50%. Is that more humanoids? I believe it is. Yep, that's more humanoids. So we roll again. 66%, that's ogres. And then finally, 62%, that's also ogres. So encounters with humanoids and ogres. So let's see what kind of humanoids we have here. Rolling on the humanoid subtable, we have more gnolls and some hobgoblins. So lots of potential allies out there for the gnolls. For the ogres, we're going to say, since it was rolled twice, this is a large band moving into the area to make it their home. So essentially, they're essentially in lair, as it were. We're going to roll for the number of ogres. It's 2 to 20 appearing in one group. I'm going to roll the 2 groups separately, but if they add up to 20 or less, it's one big group, and the gnolls will team up with them. If it's 2 separate groups, it's a very large group, then they won't, because it's these, they have to be the more powerful of the groups they're allying with. So first roll is 7, and second roll is 12. So that would be 19. So 19 ogres. So they will try to team up with the ogres, and we'll see how they react in a few minutes. The other group of gnolls, we'll roll to see if they are an in-layer group. Again, this would be a big group that's moving into the area. And if not, we'll roll on the number and see if it's a small enough number that the current gnolls would be able to essentially dominate those gnolls, because it does say that the largest dominates the lesser with the gnolls. And I think that would stand as much with numbers of different tribes as it would be with the size of the individuals. So first, are they in layer? So is this a sort of family group moving in? It's only 20% chance with the 35. That's not it. And so 20 to 200. Get out 10 d20s here. There's 180 in the current group. So let's see how many we have here. And we have 5, 10, 30, 40, 50, 65, 79, 80, 90, 100. So 100, so a little over half. So we'll say this group of gnolls has a chance to be dominated by the established group. And then lastly, the hobgoblins. So if they're about equal number, then the gnolls will consider them worthy of teaming up with. Now, of course, all these groups might not be able to work together, so we'll have to see how that goes. Let's see, we have some pretty high rolls here. Let's see here. 12 and 18 is 30. 17 and 13 is also 30, so that's 60. 19 and 11 is 30, so that's 90. 14 and 17 is 31, so that's 121. And 14 and 13 is 27, so 138, 148. That's less than 20% difference between the two. So let's see. What does it say again under the gnoll entry? It says gnolls will be on friendly terms with orcs, hobgoblins, bugbears, ogres, and even trolls, providing the weaker types are not very much weaker in numbers. So would 15 to 20% be very much weaker in numbers? Hobgoblins are 1+1 creatures, so hit die creatures, so they're not quite as weak as, say, orcs and goblins. So I'm going to say that's good enough. There's the potential for teaming up there. Oh, let's see if they're an in-layer group moving into the area, because then they could have some carnivorous apes with them, and that would up their strength too. Let's see. 25% chance, not very likely. Nope, 88. So just a large group of hobgoblins moving into the area. We're going to do a simple reaction roll. The hobgoblin entry doesn't indicate how it feels about gnolls or ogres. It does say that ogres will team up with gnolls when raiding, so that'll be good for a plus for them. Hobgoblins are also 2 steps removed from gnolls, so that'll be a minus 15% on the roll. And it's going to be a minus 5% for both groups, because it's going to be a short-term association raiding on the road for a while. So we're going to say that a minus 20% overall for getting the hobgoblins, and we're going to have a plus 10 overall for the ogres. So will the hobgoblins team up? The roll is a 56. So with the minus 15, well, the minus 20, that'd be minus 35. So that'd be uncertain but prone toward negative. 55% prone toward negative. So we roll again. And with a 90, they will team up. So it will be probably a one-time thing. The ogres plus 10% to the die roll. That is just a 26 plus 10 is 36. Again, uncertain, but 55% prone toward negative, so need to roll over 55%. And with a 93, they will also team up. Now, how much would they be willing to work together, though? That's something I'll have to figure out, and we'll also figure out how the interaction with the other group of gnolls does. But I think that's good enough for now. So, in figuring out would there be any help for the gnolls when the merchant caravan comes through, I realized I made a few errors. The first thing was, when I talked about the hobgoblins being 2 degrees away from the gnolls, I didn't make it clear what that was and how that affected the roll. It was because they're 2 degrees away in alignment. Hobgoblins are lawful evil, gnolls are chaotic evil. So that's why that was there. The second thing was, I went back to the monster manual and read the first part of the gnoll entry, where gnoll bands sometimes cooperate. They don't necessarily dislike each other, and they sometimes cooperate to tackle something they can't tackle alone, or to share in loot or pillage or something like that. So I'm going to say that the second group of gnolls will work with the first group of gnolls for one raid essentially, and then they'll move on. And the ogres will stick around as long as they feel like they're being treated well. Although, what is that to an ogre? What does an ogre think is a fair disposition of the treasure that they have? And finally, the hobgoblins. It'll probably be more about when do the gnolls decide to get rid of them, or when do the hobgoblins think that the gnolls are weak enough that they can turn on them. There's going to be a measure of power dynamics, so that'll be interesting. The final thing I realized was I said there were 8 encounters, and I only rolled for 6. So I'm going to roll for the last 2 encounters, random encounters, and see if there's anything else in the mix besides hobgoblins and gnolls and ogres. So here we go, rolling on the hills table again. We get a 44, and that's going to be another humanoid. That's exciting. I wonder if we'll see some goblins. We haven't seen goblins this entire campaign. And with a 6, we have bugbears. All right, first appearance of bugbears in the campaign, so that'll be interesting. All right, let's see who we got in the other humanoid subtable. We'll roll that sucker here. And we got a 76, so that is more orcs. We got more orcs moving in. So more orcs. And hobgoblins bully orcs, so they will cooperate for at least one raid. And then again, that power dynamic, how strong are the hobgoblins afterwards? They'll have to measure themselves not only against the gnolls, but the orcs. Can the orcs break free of their influence? So we'll have to roll up some orcs and some bugbears and see. This first raid is going to be interesting. What do bugbears like? Are bugbears cooperative people? Let's have a look. They live in loose bands and are typically found in the same areas as goblins. Unlike their smaller cousins, they speak goblin and hobgoblin, so they'll have to talk to the hobgoblins. Well, I think they'll speak hobgoblin as well. Ooh, we might have to roll and see if these guys cooperate, because it doesn't really say that they cooperate or don't cooperate. Yep, let's just do a straight roll. What are they? They're chaotic evil. So this will be even roll. 50%, 50-50. Are they gonna help out? 43. They're gonna help out. So we'll have at least one big surprise raid, and then we'll see what happens after that. Can the merchants push through? Can the merchants recover and retreat? Will there be anything left for Sir Gus and the fort guards to clean up? We shall see. Exciting times. And one more little correction on what I've been doing with the gnolls and the humanoids. They've kind of been gathering up into a raiding force. There is actually in the DMG a humanoid racial preference table, which shows which one like each other, tolerate each other, are antagonistic toward each other. And bugbears, orcs don't really like bugbears, and bugbears don't really like orcs. So those forces will have to be kind of kept separate. And also in terms of setting up what could be a confrontation, well, what's probably going to be a confrontation between this merchant's caravan trying to push through the road and the gnolls and the forces that they've assembled. I put together a little map where I put the gnoll stronghold and drew the road going down to it. And I filled out the rest of it using random terrain dice from a place called Eternal Verse Games on Etsy. And I just did essentially a dice drop, treated it like a drop table. I dropped the dice and where they fell, which faces came up, what types of terrain would be in those individual hexes. Well, really, I used it in kind of the group of the hexes around where the dice fell. And the faces have things like forest, mountains, river, hills, one that's either farms or plains, one that's either towers or castles, and hills. And what I did was, I think one is desert actually, and if the mountain or the hill came up, I considered that a spot where there was another hill. If the river came up, obviously that was a river. If the desert came up, I basically treated that as clear territory, and the plains as well. Forest is forest, and then if the tower or castle came up, I treated that as a road, where a road was, and so I had these things and just try to route them where they were. And I'll explain a little more what the map looks like when we get to that point in the campaign. But I wanted to just add that in there and talk about these dice because they're pretty cool and they're pretty good price. And it's always good to have different ways to generate terrain, whether it's tables you roll regular dice on or dice that just roll the terrain for you. And that's really going to finish up this segment. I know it's not quite as much of a segment as it has been, but it's kind of setting up what's going to be happening down the road, and the party is still adventuring, and I'm still writing some of that stuff up to get it better organized. I don't know how organized it ends up being sometimes when I put it on these podcasts, but some other things going on in the world besides just the party exploring the dungeon, and I think that's a big part of what I enjoy about this campaign is there's lots of moving parts and lots of things happening throughout the campaign world. And it's what keeps me coming back, that's for sure. So thank y'all for listening, and until next time, have fun gaming. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only. That's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.